Welcome to Spinning Back Click, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. This week, you got Mike Vaughn. He's back, one of the hardest workers in all of mixed martial arts. Matt Wells joins us this week, ready to drop some knowledge, just like he always does. And of course, rounding out the squad, it's Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. Hot takes are coming. On the ones and two this week, we want to welcome Kamikaze from the other side of the pond in London. Let's get to it. UFC's 276 main event had Israel Adesanya defeating Jared Cannonier via a unanimous decision. This was Adesanya's fifth title defense, but something feels off. Kamaru Usman recently had his fifth title defense. He was definitely tested in that fight, yet when he overcame the adversity in the fight and won, he was highly praised. Why are the praises not being heaped on Adesanya as they were? It's been off and on with this guy in terms of, I guess, the acceptance is what I'm trying to say. Unlike other dominant champions that have kind of reached that fifth title defense in the past, as Usman, as I mentioned earlier, Nunes, Shevchenko. I want to know what's the reasons behind this, guys. Mike, you're going to get things started. 4 minutes are on the clock. Go.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that these other champions aren't speaking the way pre-fight that Israel Adesanya is. I mean, he comes out throughout the week and says that I'm going to do something spectacular. I'm going to do something special. I don't care about the title as much anymore. I just want to, give highlights and memorable moments and things like that. And that's not what's end up happening in these fights. I mean, since he lost to Jan Blachowicz, there's been three kind of ho-hum fights against Marvin Vettori, Robert Whittaker, and now this one against Jared Cannonier. So when you give such a high level of expectation and it doesn't turn out that way, I mean, people are naturally going to be disappointed. This event in particular, fans for International Fight Week are paying some pretty steep ticket prices. So I can understand the frustration in-house, how they, boo and stuff like that. But am I going to sit here and chastise Israel Adesanya for it? Not really, man. I mean, there's a lot at stake for this guy. The difference between being a UFC champion and being a contender, the pay, the exposure, all this different stuff, it's pretty significant. So for someone to go out there and just focus on winning, I think I'm completely okay with that at the end of the day. So for a guy like Izzy, I mean, I'm not going to give him too much flack for what we saw. It's, incumbent on Jared Cannonier as well to push him a little bit harder and make him bring out those moments of adversity. I mean, he cruised through this fight pretty easily. So kind of is what it is in that regard. I think we're going to need the challenger to push him a little harder, but I can understand the frustration when Izzy is saying leading up to the fight, but he's also saying it because he wants people to buy the fight and put money in his pocket. So it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. All right, Matt, what are your thoughts? He was going so far as to say, if you're booing, you don't even know the fight game.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that, I guess. But, people, like Mike said, people expect to see finishes out of Izzy. People have been conditioned to think that's what he's going to do every single time because we always see his kickboxing highlights everywhere. Every time his fights come around, his kickboxing highlights show up as well. And he came in, with some spectacular highlights as well. So it's like people expect that just to be the norm, no matter his level of competition. I mean, let's not forget, he's fighting the best in the world. And these aren't people that are easily finished. Robert Whittaker is not an easy finish. Jared Cannonier is not an easy finish. Marvin Vettori is not either. He's one of the most durable guys in the division, if not the entire UFC. So I get the criticism a little bit, but at the same time, people, we got to understand who he's in there against. He's not in there against pushovers, man. I mean, people also will probably point to the fact that Alex Pereira was able to go out there and start Sean Strickland. I mean, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on, but again, level of competition, styles, matchups, things like that matter, especially at the highest levels of the sport, when hanging on to that belt at the end of the day means more than anything. It means more than getting more cheers from the fans in the crowd that night. Izzy has, millions of dollars tied up at his success. So he has to make sure that he holds onto that belt at the end of the day, no matter what.
Yeah, and Izzy will be tied to Anderson, who he's beaten, by the way, on the decline. I get it. And Kamaru gets compared to GSP, but the Kamaru GSP comparisons, they can go on for days. The other ones, I'm not hearing those as much.
Look, man, champions at the highest levels are always going to face some kind of criticism. You brought up John Jones. He faced it. Anderson Silva faced it. Even GSP faced it, right? It just happens. This particular fight, I praise him, man. I give him an A- for this fight. I thought he was very tactical. Jared Cannonier is no joke. He fought the type of fight you needed to fight to be successful. Like Matt Wells said, There's a lot tied to every single fight for this guy. But you're in Vegas, and things are just a little different in Vegas. I've seen fans walk out. I've been at a Floyd Mayweather fight where they walk out in the 7th round. But that's because Floyd maybe lacked a little bit of aggression. Izzy didn't lack aggression. I think where he gets in hot waters, guys, is just his mouth. Post-fight, in the conference room, the things he says, I think, rub people the wrong way. I think his head's gotten a little bit bigger. Let your resume do the work, Izzy.
There you go. Good stuff, fellas. All right. Topic number 2. Guess what? We're sticking with Israel Adesanya because Alex Pereira, he defeated Sean Strickland via the first round TKO in the featured bout at UFC 276. Pereira owns 2 wins over Adesanya in kickboxing, 1 via decision and 1 via a KO. He's now 6-1 overall, 3-0 in the UFC, and he just took out a top middleweight. How worried should Adesanya be about this possible future opponent? Matt, it's on you. 4 minutes.
I think you should be pretty worried a little bit, just because Alex Pereira is going to be a guy that's going to bring a fight to him, and he's not going to back down. He's going to come in with that confidence, knowing, hey, I've got wins over this guy in my back pocket as well, and also I've got the world to gain by beating Adesanya at this point as well. So becoming a UFC champion, knowing that you got wins over this guy, knowing that you've got that vision in your mind constantly as a fighter. I've put this guy down and out before. I can do it again. Whereas Izzy, he's also got that same replay in his mind, but going the opposite direction. So there's a lot going on here. And I think he should be worried a little bit because, like I said, Pereira is going to come out there and try to make something happen to have the biggest win of his career. Whereas, again, as I mentioned on the last topic, Izzy's got everything to lose as well. So I think he'll be a little bit more tentative. I don't necessarily think he was tentative against Cormier as much as he was just trying, find his spots. I think if we're going to see a tentative Adesanya, it's going to be in this next fight, if anything.
Yeah. How about you, Goes? You think Izzy's thinking about this and not leading us on to that?
I think he's going to be very worried, but that's kind of like the nature of being champion. Even if you don't expect it, you still have to treat it that way. I think what's been worrisome of some of these champions, and Israel Adesanya maybe falls into this a little bit as well, is just motivation. When you get a lot of rematches over and over, you see the same guy, it's just hard to train for that person. It's hard. The training sessions all feel the same, right? Now, this is a guy that he's fought before, but in a different avenue, right? Mixed martial arts is a completely different beast. If he can do it, I think he has to get that out of his head. He has to realize that. I think Pereira understands that we're in a different venue here, and we're kind of in Izzy's house. So I don't know that too much of that plays a lot of factor. Izzy can't let that get into his head. I think Pereira is a difficult matchup, and really, when you think about it, you see the way he fought Sean Strickland. He watched that guy. He stalked him. If you guys watch Animal Planet, the way a lion stalks his prey, that's what he did. And he waited for him to make a mistake. And when it was time, he capitalized on it. And I think what Matt Wells said, we have one of these situations where this could turn into one of those fights that we don't like from Israel Adesanya, but he's going to have to fight that way because Pereira has just as much patience as Israel Adesanya. So very tough matchup for Israel, but I feel like since those fights, he's improved. He's become a real good mixed martial artist, one of the greats right now. And Pereira's really got to watch out, man. He's got to be very aggressive, try and get it in his head. I know he doesn't speak English, but there's ways of doing it. But this fight's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and Mike, I was thinking about what you said. He may be his own worst enemy because of the pre-fight hype that he gives us. And arguably, people were saying Sean Strickland owned him at this press conference against Pereira. What can he really say to him? You know what I mean? Pre-fight, this one's going to be difficult for him in many ways.
Yeah, it's something entirely different, obviously. But I think the history and the storyline is going to speak for itself more so than any press conference exchanges. I mean, you can play, I'm sure the UFC will get the rights to that footage. You can play the kickboxing highlights, the footage of Izzy getting knocked out on the countdowns and the previews and all that stuff. So it's going to be a different kind of sales job on that. But yeah, I mean, I think both these guys are pretty on point with what they're saying. It's going to be a really compelling fight, and I'm interested to see how both guys approach it. Alex Pereira, I think, needs to go all out in this fight because I don't think he's a guy we're going to see, if he loses, work his way back up to a rematch, because the guys that he's going to have to fight, the Marvin Vittoris, the Robert Whitakers and stuff, these are nightmare matchups for him. He kind of got, shoehorned into this, and obviously he's won it, but he's been fast-tracked here. I think the UFC did it absolutely perfectly. This is the fight to make no question about it, but he's got some style-friendly fights. He's not going to get that on the second build because there's just not enough guys to do it. So Alex Pereira needs to go absolutely balls to the walls in this fight and make Israel Adesanya fight, as he said, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, but he needs to approach it that way.
All right. And Matt, I thought I saw a reaction there when I was mentioning the press conference. You want to chime in real fast?
Just the whole press conference, the press conference has become a meme now because everything Sean Strickland said blew up in his face. So, yeah, I mean, people were overblowing it. Look, like Mike said, style-friendly fights is an understatement of the year, possibly. Anybody that was just going to stand there and walk down Alex Pereira was going to get knocked out like that 99 times out of 100. So, yeah, it's all a meme at this point, that whole press conference.
All right, let's go to topic 3. Let's talk about another great fighter, another great star of the event. UFC 276 co-main event had Alex Volkanovski defeating Max Holloway. Again, another unanimous decision, and this was Volk's 4th title defense. Volk was so outstanding that the talk of him going up in weight isn't even being squashed by any of the naysayers. Usually people are saying, tap the brakes, it's too soon. Though it was revealed post-fight at the press conference that he does have an injury. He's talking about a broken hand. We don't know the severity or anything like that. Those were his feelings based on a prior injury that he's had. When he does come back, guys, let's give it a timeline of maybe 6 to 9 months. You think there'll still be a strong push for him to pursue this champ status? Or do you think there's still work to do at featherweight? Goes, get the party started. 4 minutes.
First off, naysayer. Second off, don't just tap the brakes, slam on them. Guys, this was one of the greatest performances I've ever seen from a champion defending his belt. But it was at 145, and that's where it needs to stay for now. I get it. I understand why you want to go up and challenge yourself and make a bigger paycheck. That's what this is all about for the fighter. But what's the rush? What is the rush? There's some killers at 155. You know, learn from your friend Israel Adesanya. He went up. That didn't go too well for him, and he's bounced back from it. But why not cement your legacy at 145? This week, all we did was sit there and talk about Holloway, Aldo, Volkanovski. Volkanovski made a huge push, a huge jump. Get some more title defenses. Cement your legacy there. Because at 155, man, it's a different beast. I know it's only 10 pounds, guys, but it does not feel that way. We've seen it happen before with featherweights going up to 155, and it hasn't really worked their way. Look, there's a couple guys you could toy around with, all right? Get some more work under your belt. And then who knows? You know, we saw a little taste of this. Maybe Henry Cejudo comes up and meets you, and there's your big fight, and you can make a lot of money there. And then you can talk about moving up to 155. But for right now, slam on those brakes. UFC, don't let them do it. 145 is where it needs to be.
Mike, I saw you approval there when Cejudo's name came up. Are you warm to that one, or you got some other ideas?
That feels like the one. The timing feels just so perfect to do that fight right now. I mean, I know we have this Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega fight coming up, but I don't think even if Yair Rodriguez wins, his resume really warrants a title shot right now. I mean, I guess if he does something crazy, but if you look at his recent history, I don't know, just doesn't feel right. Josh Emmett feels more worthy. Arnold Allen feels more worthy, in my opinion, but I don't know. Those guys just don't really have the cachet at the moment. I don't think there's the fan demand. I think Henry Cejudo, the timing is just so perfect for this. I think the style matchup is extremely interesting. I think he's someone that can push Volkanovski. So I would like to see that fight if he's going to stay at 145. Obviously, Cejudo could have the chance to be the first 3-division champion in UFC history. As far as the move to 155, I'm somewhat warm to it, but not crazy. I just think the timing isn't perfect for it. We obviously don't have a champion there right now. I think Charles Oliveira needs to fight Islam Makhachev. That will probably be in October. Then when are they ready to go? Sometime next year. Maybe that lines up with the timeline for when Volkanovski would be healthy again, but we need to see stuff play out. There's going to be other fights. Conor McGregor is always hanging out there in the background, his return looming. Who knows what's going to happen there? So I just don't think I'm quite ready to see Volkanovski make that move up to 55. I think there's still more work to be done at 45, but I do think if he keeps winning, that is something that's inevitably going to happen.
And speaking of cachet, check out Mike's interview with Uriah Faber. Faber said they didn't do any favors for Josh Emmett at UFC 276 as far as making him a presence. I think the DJ had a better seat than Josh Emmett at UFC 276. Anyway, how about you, Matt? Close things up here.
No, I think the guys have made some great points. It's like the timing's not right for a move to 155 because there's that log jam right now. We have that Venkat title. We don't know who's going to really fight for that next. And then you look at the guys that would be fighting for that title potentially, like Charles Oliveira, I think is just a nightmare matchup for Volkanovski. I think he could find ways to make it interesting, but at the end of the day, I think it would just be Charles Oliveira getting his hand raised. But at 145, I think there are some interesting matchups there. But to Mike's point, it's just like, who are those guys that will really get that fan interest going? Josh Emmett, if he were to have a more like dominant performance against Calvin Kattar, I think you could have more support there. But I think he can make that fight interesting because he's going to go in there and try to knock his head off. He's going to try to swing for the fences. But I think the timing, like you guys said, man, that Henry Cejudo fight is really perfect right now. When you have that backstage interaction as well that you can play in promos, I think that would be the perfect way to go, considering the timing of everything. But move to lightweight at some point, just not right now.
Endless possibilities at feather and light for sure. All right, top 4. Earlier in the week, Daniel Cormier was inducted into the UFC's Hall of Fame. During his speech, Cormier admitted to using the towel trick from his wrestling days to make the official weight at UFC 210. If you recall, Cormier initially weighed in 1.2 pounds over the championship limit of 205. He came back on a second attempt and made weight. And then he went on to defend his light heavyweight title the following day versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. This all happened while not doing anything to shed the additional weight in between his weigh-in attempts. What are your thoughts on his honesty, his admission during his Hall of Fame speech? Mike, it's back at you. 4 minutes, please.
Well, I think out of everyone on the panel here, I might have the least strong emotions about this. I'm not entirely bothered by his admission. I mean, there is so much stuff that goes on in the sport that feels a lot worse than this. He took advantage of a situation. It's not his fault. People try to bend the rules or work around certain things in the sport all kinds of ways, obviously with the exception of stuff like, doing steroids and things like that, which is, really crossing the line. Obviously, he took advantage of a commission that was, not experienced enough to capitalize or like see what he was doing in that moment. And it, worked out for him. If he'd been caught, he would have paid the punishment, and probably been fighting for a vacant title or whatever may have happened there. So I don't know, we're years later at this point. I think it's kind of being beaten to death. I think it was like a little anecdote he felt like dropping there, but it wasn't something that I was like, oh gosh, throw my hands up, let's go revoke his win and revise history and stuff. It's just something that happened. I mean, I honestly don't have too serious of thoughts on this, so I'm just going to pass it off to the next person.
All right, and that's you, Matt. What are your thoughts? I think you're on the other side, right?
Dude, I loved everything about this because he tried to make it this thing where it didn't happen, even though we had it in. He got caught in 4K from multiple angles, pulling down the towel, and he tried to make it a thing that it didn't happen, and it became a joke. And then for him to do it on that stage and finally admit it was a perfect moment for me. But the thing that got weird was when everybody was like, oh, we need to go and look at stripping him of the Hall of Fame and taking away, why? This wasn't something new. This wasn't like John Jones admitting something crazy happening, like he ran from USADA and produced a video of that or something. No, we already saw what happened. If you brought that video to court, he would have been guilty. It's not something that was some super secret. Everybody knew what happened and everybody was okay with it at the time. Just because he admitted it now doesn't mean anything different in terms of taking away his accolades or anything like that. We knew what happened. Everybody knew. But I just think it was funny to cap off the whole joke and finally admit it and open up and then not just admit it, but actually go into great detail about how it all got to that point. I thought it was pretty great. So I love the story. As I tweeted out, that was probably one of my favorite articles to write during my time here in Junkie, because I just loved that whole timeline of everything. I remember I was watching those weigh-ins in Jamaica at the time. I was on vacation, and my fiance got mad because I was on my phone watching UFC stuff while we were on the beach. But it is what it is. Neither here nor there. I'm glad it got admitted, and it just puts a bow on this hilarious story for me.
How about you, Goes? Is it right there with the snowplow in New England, the hand of God in Mexico during the Argentina-England game?
Yeah, it happens. These things happen in sports. Just buy your opponent a steak, right? Isn't that what Masvidal is going to do for Drake? Just make up for it. What's done is done. He went for it at the moment. He got away with it. It's a fraction of a pound. The fight probably wouldn't have changed very much anyway. The only thing, and so here's the thing though. In sports, there are kind of these little mysteries, and how long did we have to wait for Roberto Duran to finally address no mas, right? I'm glad he addressed it. The only little pushback I'll give you guys is I wish he didn't do it at the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame's about greatness. I wish, he's a broadcaster. He's got his podcast. I wish we would have done it there, somewhere in there, because then we probably wouldn't hear all these hooligans going off and giving their opinions. And like Matt said, trying to strip the memory and all that. Like, enough's enough. I think he should have probably done it on his podcast or something like that. But things happen. On ours, yeah, we would have appreciated that. That would have been interesting. Three of us talking about making weight. I mean, I don't know the last time me and George did that. But yeah, it wasn't the end of the world, man.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Yeah, I don't know if that was the spot for it, but I had no problem with it all. I just wonder what would have happened if that New York commission official was in Arizona when Charlie Olives needed some help.
Yeah,
but anyway, we move on. The fifth topic here is Donald Cerrone. He took his gloves off and his hat in the octagon after suffering a loss at the hands of Jim Miller. Says he doesn't love it anymore. Hollywood beckons. How will you remember the Cowboy? Is he a UFC Hall of Famer in your eyes? Matt, to the way, you got the 4 minutes.
Without a doubt. Like if the UFC wanted to hold an impromptu Hall of Fame ceremony tomorrow, he would be at the top of the bill for sure. Cerrone's going to be remembered for being that guy that showed up anytime, any place, anywhere. The fan interaction that he brought, just the smile on his face as he was walking down, the aisle every single time to go to the cage. And, he came to fight every time. I remember sitting cage side in Toronto. I thought he killed Matt Brown. He has some incredible highlights throughout his career, right? But there's also going to be those people that, really know his career, really studied, his ups and downs. They're also going to knock him for being that guy that got to the top fights. And then when he got to the top fights, he faltered, which is a fair criticism because that's what literally happened. But I think at the end of the day, more people are going to remember him for being that guy that was like, hey, you want to fight? I'm the guy. I know a guy, that famous phrase that we always go to. So end of the day, absolute Hall of Famer. There's no argument about that.
Yeah, and goes. We've seen this guy since WEC, and he has just not stopped. And honestly, guys, he didn't look that bad on Saturday before that slip. But what are your thoughts, Goes? I know you have an opinion about UFC Hall of Fame, and if there ever is an independent MMA Hall of Fame, I'm curious to see what you think.
We'll get to Hall of Fame, man. That topic kind of scares me because Cowboy's carry, and I don't think he's going to like what I have to say. But Cowboy Cerrone, he left a huge mark on the sport, Whether you liked the song or not, when his music played, you found yourself moving to it. There was something about it. He became a character. The UFC had a lot of characters, right? You had the Iceman, the Huntington Beach bad boy, but that was during fight week. They were kind of normal cats, not now, but they were kind of normal cats hanging around Huntington Beach doing their thing. But Cowboy was always Cowboy. I don't even know that he was a character. He was just that guy all the time, right? 365 days a year. But here's the thing. When it comes to Hall of Fame, you guys aren't going to like this, but I just don't feel like he falls in there. He's one of these guys like a Joe Lazon, a Jim Miller, where I do feel like there needs to be a spot for them somewhere in the Hall of Fame, but not really under the same banners of some of the other guys that we just finished talking about, right? Khabib, Daniel Cormier. I don't know if the statistics kind of match what those guys have done. But the Hall of Fame is kind of what it is already. We need something independent, somebody to really get it right, because I just don't know that those stats are up there where they need to be. But my favorite Cowboy Cerrone moment to end on a good note was when he fought Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez came in with a lot of hype from Bellator, and Cowboy was the first guy to meet him. And he said, "You're not going to make a name off of me." And he checked them, and I thought that was a great moment for Cowboy Cerrone.
Yeah. All right, Mike Baum, what are your thoughts here? You covered a lot of Cowboy fights.
Yeah, I completely disagree with Goes as far as the Hall of Fame. I mean, I think if there was an MMA Hall of Fame, maybe you could make an argument that he shouldn't get in just because, maybe there's a tighter restriction. But a UFC Hall of Fame, unequivocally, man. I mean, what this guy's done, he did everything short of winning a UFC championship belt, and he fought for it.
But that's important, Mike. That's
it is, of course, but there's people in there that didn't make it that far. I mean, he maybe cost himself at his own detriment to not win a title by taking fights at the wrong places, not waiting, making some perhaps poor career decisions because he kept up the moniker. He wanted to be a company guy. I think he maybe he cut his career short in some ways by following the Cowboy path, but at the end of the day, man, like just look at the resume. Like, you know, he was holding that UFC wins record for a very long time. He has the most wins in UFC, WEC, Strikeforce, Pride combined history. He has the most bonuses in UFC history. He has the most knockdowns landed in UFC history. He, at a time, had the most stoppage wins in UFC history, the most knockouts stemming from kicks in UFC history. I could go on and on and on here. He fought a who's who. Yes, he didn't win them all, but man, like he brought the entertainment. He had the personality. He is the dichotomy of the perfect MMA fighter, like to a degree. What you think of an MMA fighter, what he should be, Donald Cerrone comes to mind, you know, is kind of a 1A type scenario. So yeah, all respect to him for a great career, for giving us so many amazing moments. And I know for a fact we will see him in the UFC Hall of Fame one day. There's no question.
Yeah, we do need an MMA Hall of Fame, because otherwise Coker, Fedor, a lot of fighters won't be part of the UFC Hall of Fame. Even though the UFC wound up, you know, buying all these promotions, I always wonder what's going to happen there. But I guess Fedor's not done officially yet anyway. Good stuff as always, guys. I really like this group. Don't tell the last group I said that. You guys knocked it out of the park. And safe travels to Mike. I know he's got to get going. Thank you to Kamikaze for being on the ones and twos. And folks, we got you covered every Tuesday here on the Spinning Back Clique. Check it out. Share it with your friends. Leave a comment below. I'm always in there throwing elbows. So make it some good ones. All right, folks. See you next week.